Welcome back, everybody. Today we're here with Tommy, who is a really good friend of mine, and he's a coach. And we figured we would do a Q&A. Person asked, cycle for an older demographic, 55 plus.
I like this one.
It's kind of cool. You can take that one first if you want.
Okay. So I have a few thoughts on this.
Do you know the person?
I know this guy. Yeah, I know him well enough.
He's not. No.
He's not my client. I don't have a ton of his previous history on.
I was just curious if he had used.
He's in shape, everything like that. He takes care of himself. He is about 55. I'm pretty sure. Whenever the older demographic is looking to continue to use gear or PEDs of some sort, you're going to find a few different risk tolerances, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things is some guys just don't care, Kurt. They don't care. They live. Some of them have raised their children already. They're happy with where they are. That doesn't mean they're trying to kill themselves.
No, they just don't care.
They just don't care. If something did happen, they would be at peace with it.
Or they say they would. Well, who knows when it actually happens?
Or they say they would
until they get sick, and then all of a sudden,
until they're lying next to the dialysis machine, right?
Yeah, I've met lots of people who think that way until they are on dialysis or something similar, and then it's a whole different story.
Yeah. So so there's guys that truly don't care. There's guys that say they don't care, and then there's guys that just want to look good on the beach. They want to feel good with their wife next to them. They want to perform for their wife. They want to, go to restaurants and be the best looking dad at the restaurant. College graduation, they want their big bicep around their daughter because they're proud of her, right? Those cycles are going to be vastly different.
Yeah.
And what's your current blood work? What's your history? What kind of health problems are you having now? Because sometimes they start to accumulate over time. And they get worse, right? What kind of injuries do you have? What's your diet like? Is it even worth using the drugs if you can't even stay compliant to training and diet? Yeah. How much do you travel? Do you travel for work a lot? Are you retired yet? There's all these things that come into play. But if I were to give generic, random numbers, right, I would pick one that you just feel good on and that you can keep your blood work good. So for one guy, that might be 300 milligrams of testosterone with a couple IUs of growth hormone, right? Who knows? Some guy might feel great at 500 and his blood pressure.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of
blood pressure is great. And depends what's your body composition like, because you shouldn't be blasting gear if you're over fit. Well, you shouldn't be blasting gear at all if you're not in shape, right? Because what type of performance are you enhancing if you don't have baseline performance to begin with?
None.
So you're not going to take a beat up rusted Honda Civic and make it a Ferrari.
No.
But, if you have a decent base starting point, a good composition, maybe you're on a little TRT, and you want to run little hits of whatever here and there. I got, buddy, this. A lot of my friends are of the older demographic. I got friends from 48 years old all the way up to 60 years old, and they all do different stuff, and they all do what's just going to keep them healthy. I got guys that run full blast cycles still, and they can do it with good health and good conscience. They're like, I know what this does. I'm okay with it. And most of them, I know for a fact, are honest when they say, my kids are good. My family's set. There's money in the bank if I do die. This is what I love to do. My family respects it. I've done it for X amount of years. We have all known if something does happen that it could have been a result of my anabolic use, right?
Yep.
And if you can be truly honest with that, I mean, one, that's a good feature to have. And two, it takes a lot to be that honest, but I think it's out there. And we've talked about risk tolerance before several times, and everyone's going to be a little different, and it may shift over time. But I won't ramble. I want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, it was just the simplest answer I would say would probably be some level of testosterone and some level of growth hormone.
Yeah.
Right. And the rest of it's personal choice. Depends on what you want out of it and what you've done before. If a guy is, if you're talking about a former guy who was 270 who ran grams a year,
Right.
he's probably going to feel god awful on 150 milligrams
200.
of
Yeah,
test.
exactly.
So, and I know that. So it's like that wouldn't be what I'd recommend. Perhaps you titrate down to that point at some point, but you know that he's going to lose. He's also going to lose muscle significantly at that
Yeah.
point. Right? Your body composition can't hold. But if he's a regular dude and that's really all he's used, we have not been able to invent better drugs than testosterone growth hormone. You know, unfortunately,
We don't have to.
no, we don't have to. God did that already, and we can play with these molecules all day long. We're not going to come up with some better. Primo's not better than test.
No, we don't. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We were born with this stuff.
Exactly.
You know.
The next one, prevention of bubble gut. I mean, I have a couple thoughts on it.
Okay.
You know, if you might have some other. Honestly, the biggest one is just food. Just control the volume of food that you're eating and do ab work. Don't let your stomach get like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about for the average guy. When you're talking about Olympic top level pros, there's some different things that go on there. It's not necessarily growth hormone like people think or insulin usage.
No, I don't agree with that.
You don't see that with bottles of growth hormone usage in HIV. Either guts.
Why doesn't Roman have a bubble gut?
Correct. What drug does cause or can cause it when used in excessive doses is IGF, like Increlux in huge doses can cause the intestines to actually grow and the intestinal internal parts actually to shrink. So you actually start absorbing food properly. So the lining will actually shrink and the muscle itself will grow.
That one I didn't know.
So, but you're talking about, I hate discussing doses because I don't want anyone to copy this. The medical dose for Increlux is like 250 micrograms a day, split in 2 doses. There are pros that use 4 times that amount.
Yeah.
So that is not something anyone should do. I can't get behind that.
Well, they can't get it anyways, so it's okay.
You go hypo, it's a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
But you do things like that. A lot of times it's mostly food, just being out of shape, letting yourself get severely overweight in the off season and not training right. And then we manipulate weird things, like if your electrolytes are off and you're not able to absorb nutrients out of your intestines, right? Like you see it during prep, or if you crush your estrogen, it messes with bile production. If you take too many oral steroids, you screw with bile production.
Yep.
It's just general health. Like Roman looks good because he's generally healthy.
Yeah.
Right. For a 14th best guy in the world or whatever his ranking is, he's relatively healthy.
Yeah.
And he cares about the way he looks. He's got a great physique.
The Increlex one is new to me because, in my opinion, it's not from a specific drug. The Increlex,
that's the only one that I know of.
Okay, so that I'll consider an
usage.
Yeah, so that I'll consider an outlier.
Very outlier. It's expensive, hard to find, and you're talking about top guys. If you look at the guys on the top 5 in the Olympia, you'll notice that a few of them, the actual blocks are much larger than the other guys. Mm-hmm. That stuff a lot of times is from those weird.
Okay.
Right, because you'll notice some of them have tighter waists than other ones. They're also, as you grow. What's your current weight now?
I'm this morning I was like 225, so I'm up a little bit still from the loading this weekend.
Okay. But so think about it. So you're 225. If we got you to the Olympia stage in a couple years and you were weighing at 295.
Yeah.
You have a tiny waist. You're not going to keep that waist.
No.
It's got to grow somewhere because otherwise you'd fall over.
And even to start way back to the beginning, what are we calling a bubble gut? Is it because you caught someone in the middle of transitioning to a different pose?
Totally.
Or is it because the dude's just walking through the grocery store, not sucking his gut in, and he's 4 or 5 meals deep in the off season? Is it a bubble gut, or is it just his stomach full of food?
I mean, bodybuilders eat a lot of food.
Yeah, the bubble gut thing, man, Kurt, I was 265, 270 in the off season, and I would consider what I had was a bubble gut, but it's gone. And the other thing is, this is the last thing I'll mention, is age, because as you get older, you lose the strength of your TBA. So you can get distension from the actual transverse abdominis getting weaker, right? So it is a good idea for, especially if guys have ambition to get on stage, to practice vacuums, at least in some capacity. Yeah. Like myself, I cannot pull a full vacuum, but that's okay because I don't pose with them anyways. But I still do them every single day. And I do them during cardio. I do them while I'm tanning.
You
I
got a
do
great
'em-
shape.
yeah, I do them in the shower, and maybe they're doing nothing, but it
No, it's
helps.
doing something. That's
It
why you have
might,
a great
it
shape.
might, right? So at least I assume that it is, but yeah. So that's all I got on bubble guts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't generally think most of the time it's just being like so-called out of shape, right? Eating a lot of food. It's
Yeah,
not generally a drug. It's not insulin usage. It's not GH.
yeah, I agree.
The PED recommendation for new clients, how to determine what to recommend.
So this guy was asking, someone new comes to you, what do you put them on? And this is a tricky
So
one.
many variables.
This is a tricky one. And he did mention some things. He's like, do you base it off previous history? So
Health markers.
I'll let you start with it. And
The same as for the older guy. I'm almost 55 myself, so I shouldn't say that.
sure.
I think a lot of it depends. I mean, most of the guys that I get that are lifestyle guys that are like most of my guys are probably 30 to 60. I think I have a 62-year-old. So I don't generally get a lot younger than 30.
Okay.
Pros perhaps, but like amateur guys generally are middle age because they're generally coming to me because they're trying to be more responsible.
Yeah.
At least learn something. That's generally, I don't generally get a lot of young reckless guys. Most of them are already on TRT or some low level cycle. Generally, that's not the first thing I manipulate anyway. I manipulate food because their food sucks. It always sucks. It's the worst.
Dude, yeah.
It's amazing how bad people's diets are, even when they think it's good.
100%.
I don't think generally for most guys that more gear is the answer. It's perhaps it's a change in compound. It might be the wrong thing. Like not everything's right for everyone. Like we've talked about, right? There's a reason why you pick certain compounds for certain people.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm going to go back to, unless they're trying to compete, test does 90% of what all the other things do. If it's used correctly.
I'm glad you said that. Because if I have a guy come to me and I know a little bit about his history, because it's on my intake form, I asked them a little bit about their history. And I have a guy come to me. I don't even talk about gear at first. I say, here's your diet. Here's your approved plan. Here's your cardio recommendation. Here's your hydration recommendation. Here's the amount of times I want you working out a week based off what you sent me that you do now. Here's the times that I want you having meals roughly. I get all these things in order, which you and I would both agree are, 70, 80, 90% of what needs to change. And then I write it out and I make adjustments as needed. And then finally they'll ask about gear. Some guys ask about gear right up front. And I'm just like, okay, let's get dialed in. Because if you're not compliant to your diet, I'm not even going to talk about gear with you. Because just like we said earlier, what performance are you enhancing if you don't have any baseline performance to begin with? So I generally push it off as long as I can. And let's see how much progress we can make on what you're on now. And what they're on now may be whatever they came to me on. If it's something reckless, I will change it. But if they come to me,
so I might go down. I typically don't go up.
No, it's so rare that I would, unless it's a guy that is knocking on a pro card.
That's different. Competitors are different, and generally they kind of have an idea.
Yeah, I had one guy come to me, and he's trying to win his first pro show. He is a pro, and he showed me his cycle, and I'm like, honestly, dude, it's kind of low. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to say it, but I said, here's what I would do. And that's the other thing. I don't make prescriptions. I make recommendations on what I would do if I was in their exact situation.
That's all you can do.
And I know that's what you do as well.
Yeah. But this is what I see. This is what guys in your situation typically would use.
100%.
What else can you say? I mean, Rick Hans would have my head if I said, or he would never help me if I told people what to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's the way I am. I don't think it's generally. Yeah. And again, I'll go back to test. I very rarely. I think that's a current thing with the internet too, is that like all of a sudden there's this big push that everyone needs to jump to something else outside of test when they've not even used a real amount of test.
Yeah.
Like if you, Again, the dosing, I get nervous talking about dosing, but
So do
you know,
I. Yeah.
some guys, like, if he's not used 500 milligrams of test in his life, assuming it's not his first cycle, if he's used test, for a while and he's not used 500 or 600 milligrams, what are you adding other things for? I get it. The Derek at More Plates, More Dates said this years ago. Again, I think it was out of context. I don't think that that's actually what he meant.
And again, if you and I sat in a room with Derek and we started having a conversation, we would all come to the same answer.
And I don't know Derek, and he seems like a very nice guy.
Sure, whatever.
And, and he's largely he's largely responsible for me even being on the internet. But
100%.
That being said, he probably was making up his usage too. I think at one point he said he used 1,500 milligrams most ever. I know that that's not the case.
Right.
But whatever. It's irrelevant. So we got to take everything with a grain of salt. I don't think he meant use 150 test and add Primo. That was not what he was talking about.
No, not at all. And I mean, you want to know what a decent load of test feels like first.
Because your body's going to deal with it the best. If you can't tolerate test, what do you think you're going to tolerate?
Nothing.
I mean,
you better pick up a different sport. You know,
that's really, like, your body's used to dealing with that.
Yeah. And that's my exact stance.
I mean, I've come there, and that's something that AJ and I talked about as well. I think we're all coming to that kind of place that, like, this, for like lifestyle guys, like, maybe work harder, eat better, and rely less on gear. Competitors are different. There has to be a push at some point to get there. That doesn't mean that that's what you're doing forever.
No.
You know what I mean? You know that. There's a goal that has to be accomplished. You have to get there. After that doesn't mean
sometimes there's a time. Sometimes there's a time frame.
Yeah.
Some guys are dead set on, I am done bodybuilding by the time I'm 40. Me personally, you and I know I don't have a set point.
No. So you do what you have to do until it's no longer right. You don't have to have a set point. I didn't have a set point. I planned on continuing, and I realized that I'm better served on this planet by helping people like you.
Sure.
I'd rather put my eggs in that basket because you have potential, I don't. So that's the way I look at things. So I'm going to use my brain to help guys that actually can become something.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, I didn't have a preconceived notion of when I would stop, and you don't have to.
No, exactly.
And I realized it wasn't healthy. It wouldn't be healthy for my family anymore. And you'll see this when
Yep, exactly.
Very soon. You're going to see
very soon. Very soon.
So you have to see what's worth it to you.
Yeah.
The next
one. So that's how, to conclude that's how we would approach a new client coming to us. We would look at, what have you done? What do you tolerate? Are you prone to, estradiol or aromatization? Are you prone to anxiety from nandrolones? And we would try to take these things into effect. But it sounds like Kurt and I are on the same page, where we're not touching anything until we know that you can be 100% compliant to your training and to your diet, because otherwise you're just wasting oil.
And potentially making yourself ill.
Could be making yourself ill. 100%.
There's lots of guys in commercial gyms that do lots of gear look horrible.
Yeah, come on.
Total shit. The next one, I could just do really fast if you want.
Go ahead.
I think it's just misunderstood. So someone asked about yohimbine, when to use it. So I think basically it stems from the ECA stack, which was ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin. And then people over time removed the aspirin out of that stack. And then they felt like, similar to steroids, that they needed to replace the milligrams with something else.
Mm-hmm.
So someone got the idea to use yohimbine. Now, a couple things. The aspirin was in the stack not to thin your blood. It's a misunderstanding is why aspirin was in there, because the process of burning fat, beta oxidation, is a prostaglandin response, and aspirin will basically help prolong the half-life of those drugs, so the prostaglandin response continues.
Okay.
So it's actually there because otherwise the ephedrine caffeine half-life is very short.
So it's an extended release.
It's to extend the drug.
Okay.
But that being said, guys that are using injectable things that are already taking fish oil, if you had, the recommended dose of aspirin was relatively high. If you had 900 milligrams of aspirin, you're going to get hematoma when you inject something. So not necessarily the wisest thing either. I'm not recommending that people take that much aspirin either. You could probably use baby aspirin or just leave it out. Right? Yep. If you're dosing it 3 times a day, like the standard used to be back in the day, you probably don't need the aspirin.
Right.
And that was also the patented formula when that one brand had the ECA patented formula. It had real aspirin in it. Willow bark was like the alternative that was not patented.
Okay.
Yohimbine is kind of different. So you have on a fat cell, you basically have an alpha receptor and a beta receptor. Beta blockers that we use for blood pressure are on that same beta receptor. That fat is burned through that beta. That's what's beta oxidation. Alpha receptors where the fat goes in. And yohimbine kind of works the opposite way. It basically, it's working as an antagonist at that receptor to basically stop fat from going in. So the easiest way I can explain this is, in a deficit, why would you use it? You're not technically storing any fat because of physics. The second rule of thermodynamics dictate that you can't store. That being said, there's constantly some level of fat storage, glycogen storage, and burning all the time, regardless of your calories, because
of course,
after a meal, you're going to have a slight
effect. Yeah.
That being said, the net outcome is still not going to be positive because you're still eating in a deficit. If you're somehow storing fat in a deficit,
you're doing something wrong.
You're
not in the deficit.
So exactly. I would say, in my opinion, and also yohimbine tends to play funny things with people's blood pressure.
Yeah.
I never felt good on it. I've tried it a couple times. It's also not regulated, the dosing of it, because it's made not, it's just made in like.
Yeah, I think if you get like a certain, there's so many different like extracts and kinds.
I don't know. I never liked it.
I don't know enough about it. I really don't even bother much with it.
I equate it to insulin. I would say, again, here I go with the insulin thing. I would say if you're on a low carb, like most guys, a carb cycle, or if you're dieting, if you're on a low carb day, what are you using insulin for? You're not going to force. You can't force glycogen storage in a deficit
when it's not there. Yeah,
it's not there.
Yeah,
it can't happen. So you're just making yourself go hypo.
I do use, for myself at least, I do use insulin on my loading days.
No, that's what I was going to say.
But there's a point to that, right? Exactly.
But what I was going to say with yohimbine, relating that to yohimbine, because I think they're similar in that manner. I would 100%. Say yohimbine, I would use in your off season, right? Because I mean, why not kind of blunt some of the fat storage that can occur in your off season? I mean, the goal is to get more muscular. The goal is not to get fat.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my athletes, I don't like when my athletes get fat. I want people to stay in shape year round. I would rather you look good all the time, and we just have to diet a little bit to get you peaked.
And looking good is a side effect, but you and I both know that you grow more when you're not fat.
Oh hell yeah!
You get fatter when you're fat, so just don't be fat.
You're inflamed and you're bloated, and it's just a mess. Like that's what I would do. I would personally, I don't think yohimbine is necessary in a deficit. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
Outside of perhaps a high day or whatever.
Sure.
GH sides more when IM, less when sub Q, localized spot reduction. Yeah. Is the person saying they get more sides when IM?
They're asking you to expand on it. Okay. They said that you briefly mentioned that you potentially get, they quoted you pretty directly. They said that you get more side effects from intramuscular use of growth hormone. You get less from sub Q, and the potential of localized lipolysis, localized fat reduction, spot reduction.
I don't remember saying that exactly. It might be out of context slightly. I would say the benefit to IM versus sub Q, same with an oil, is that it delayed release.
The response.
Like if you're using, so the standard rule in medicine is that peptides, insulin, growth hormone, they're used subcutaneous, and oils like testosterone, nandrolone are used intramuscular. That's how they were designed.
Because generally you're using some type of peptide for a desired purpose at this exact time. Okay.
And also the oils have an ester attached to slow the release. You don't need to inject it into fat to slow the release. It already has that science built in.
Yes.
And it's going to get better blood flow. Like the glutes have the best blood flow. That's why you can look at charts. There's tons of charts with like your glutes will always get the best blood flow just because you're moving around. You're using that muscle all the time versus your shoulders like sitting idle. That being said,
so that will cleave the ester faster using your glutes.
Yeah, because you're getting more. Yeah, esterases are in the blood, so they're just going to be slightly more active versus you slowing it down on purpose. I would say you could potentially get more side effects IM because you're getting it peaked in the blood faster. The only reason why I would ever inject growth hormone or tell someone to use IM would be if you're using it multiple times a day, not twice. Like if you're trying to use 4 times a day, because then you're getting a much faster turnaround.
Yeah, you're hitting the peaks
and then the receptors back up again. Versus sub Q, you got a couple hours before it's there.
Yeah,
you're injecting once or twice a day. Just do it sub Q.
Yeah, because you're making your own peaks and valleys when you're
Yeah.
doing an
So
intramuscular.
if you're a guy who insists on injecting 4 times a day, you're probably going to have to do IM unless you don't sleep.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
that would be the only thing. Localized spot reduction, it's not so much localized spot reduction. You do see weird, mostly again in people with HIV that have odd fat storage patterns and they're using whole bottles of Serum.
Hmm.
If they use the same spot over and over again, you get weird like lipolysis, like in the areas where the
Sure.
injections go, you get pock marks from it basically. But that doesn't mean like you should be using it for spot reduction because again, the whole theory between IM and sub Q and directing it in a spot muscle, people have to understand like the drugs have to enter circulation before they're doing anything. You're not
Right.
otherwise my glutes would be enormous. The
Yeah,
muscle that
exactly.
the drug in doesn't grow.
Right.
That's not the way that works. If there's any growth that you notice, that's inflammation.
Inflammation. Yeah.
It's fluid volume from the injection, if there's enough, and inflammation. It's injecting growth hormone into your bicep doesn't cause that bicep to grow. It's still going.
Yeah. No, if it did that, I would do everything there.
So that's not what's occurring. It's going into circulation, and the mechanical tension is bringing it back into the muscle, splicing it as a MGF, and that's a muscle growth occurs.
Yeah.
It's not like I know Todd has talked about this. That's just not the correct use for it, and that's why it's not used like that medically. It's not. You're not taking AIDS patients and sticking it in 8 different places on them. You're just doing the whole bottle. Long story short, I just with the growth hormone, it's simplest just to use it. I don't. There is a little bit, perhaps more fat loss if you split up the dose. It's really debatable. If your diet's on point, I can't honestly tell you that there's much of a difference. I
don't personally put much thought into any of this stuff. I just do it at the same time, the same way.
That's what matters.
Forever and ever and ever. Yeah, exactly.
What fits into your life? That's what matters, right?
Yeah.
Same with using an AI. Guys are like, do I need to take a Rimidex when I inject test? No, the kinetics are totally different.
Take it when you remember
a regular interval that you're going to remember with breakfast or lunch. Whenever you're going to remember it, that's what you do. Everyone's making things so complicated.
Mine's next to my toothbrush.
Yeah.
So I keep my Rimidex next to my toothbruch.
Yeah. Injecting guys are like, do I have to inject every other day? Do I have to inject every day? Dude, there's an ester on the. I need the question on here. We'll get to that one.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
The funny thing is, it's like you're still making it really complicated. 99% of the time, there's a reason why there's an ester attached there. You can just use it as designed.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. Blood serum estradiol irrelevant. No, it's not irrelevant. What it is though is 5-alpha reductase and aromatase enzyme are intercellular. They're both enzymes that are in the cell, whether it's a fat cell, which is where most of the aromatase enzyme is. There's some inside muscle cells though, and same with 5-alpha reductase. The serum level of estradiol that's in your blood has already been converted in a cell and then basically spit out. So
and I shortened this. He had a whole bunch of stuff written. And what I wanted to mention is you never said irrelevant when you were talking about this. And you said that it's situational, like a lot of things, right? And I don't want to misquote you, but from what I took away from it is if a guy's still getting estrogen side effects and his blood serum's buried, it can still be high.
Yes.
And it can be high at a cellular level, right?
And so you still use, and the way to treat it is still using an anti-estrogen.
It's the same compound. You do the same thing.
There's nothing has changed with the science. And the way to verify that is something called Dutch testing. Now, I'm not normally a fan of that because it's not considered actual medical practice, at least in the United States. It's it's basically a metabolite test, and a lot of times it's irrelevant. But with that specifically, it's kind of cool because you'll still see what amount of estrogen is inside the cell, regardless of what's in serum, which is pretty cool. So it'll show you that you can still lower it more if there's still estrogen inside. It's obviously, right? Medicine's based on averages. Like I always talk about these ranges. The ranges are great and all, but you still have to treat someone as an individual. If they're having estrogen sides, their estrogen's at 29. It doesn't mean that you just deal with it. It doesn't mean that you pull test out entirely.
No.
Deal with it as needed and see what happens. You'd be amazed.
Yeah.
Not everyone responds to the same thing. No, but it's definitely not irrelevant. My point was serum levels of these hormones are used more in disease states than they are for bodybuilding. We obsess about these numbers, IGF.
Okay, I'm glad you said that.
The DHT in serum is irrelevant. It is not doing anything. It is bound to, so sex hormone binding globulin binds most of these steroid hormones to some degree. estrogen, DHT, testosterone. When testosterone is bound to it, it can still be active. It can still bind not only to the androgen receptor, but it binds to the sex hormone binding globulin receptor.
Mhm.
When DHT binds to sex hormone binding globulin, because the A ring is saturated, I'm not going to get into a ton of biochemistry here, but that basically renders that both useless. So now it's bound and totally useless. So what's floating in your blood as DHT is not causing hair loss.
No.
It can't, because it cannot interact with the cell. Your rate limit on 5-alpha reductase, what's going to cause, hair loss is also other androgens, but what's going to cause things like, prostate enlargement, not cancer, and things like hair loss is basically you're born with that rate limit inside your cells at certain locations, like your prostate or your scalp. You can't change that. It doesn't matter how muscular you are.
It's the amount of receptors at the
inside the cell. And that's what
inside the
really
cell.
matters. It's getting converted in there. Like some tissues, like in your prostate, will take testosterone, and immediately, as soon as that androgen receptor enters, it converts it to DHT.
Mhm.
It doesn't want testosterone as testosterone at that point.
Mhm.
But that's a rate limit that you were born with. And what's then spit back out into the space, into the serum, in that respect, is not doing anything. Estradiol is still doing something when it's in, because it is loosely bound. It can still interact with an estrogen receptor. So it's not
Mhm.
useless. Where it becomes more useless is when guys are measuring IGF and stuff in the blood. That plays a role when you're talking about giantism and things like that, or disease, pituitary adenemas, things that are like a total body thing, not muscle.
Or even like cancer and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, because even tumors will secrete their own IGF. So that's why they look at these things. But we talk about bodybuilding, talk about bound to either free IGF or bound to binding protein 3. If it's bound to binding protein 1 from estrogen, it's useless, is stuck. And it has to enter a cell anyway. It's not doing anything in serum.
Right. And I'm a huge proponent of getting blood work done. I don't know that it needs to be done as frequently as some people are getting it done.
6 months is probably fine.
Yeah, and I also don't know that it's worth getting done if you don't know what you're looking at. So if you're
have someone like you or I to look at it.
If you're gonna get it done, please send it to someone. Because
because the average doctor is not going to look at this, nor are they going to write. So something that you're taught, that doctors are taught, is they don't want to write for things that are actionable. So it's kind of backwards what you would think. So if you're a cardiologist, you only want to write for things that are related to cardiac function, because you know how to deal with those. If you start writing for endocrine things and something's off, you weren't taught how to deal with them, but you now know it's out of range. Now it's your responsibility to fix it. So now you have to deal with it, and it's not your thing. So now you either have to find someone to deal with it, or you have to figure it out, because if something goes wrong, it's you. Yeah. So you'll notice your GP will write for the most basic stuff, because they don't know how to read those numbers, and it's not their fault. They weren't taught. There's a reason why they went to school for X amount of years, and someone with this specialty went to school for twice as long.
Yeah,
something very specific. It's not a failure of the medical system. You can't know everything.
No.
But so like, it's not that these numbers are totally irrelevant. I think the context is that for bodybuilding purposes, it's not the end all be all of what's going on.
Right.
IGF, you would have to do a biopsy to really see what's going on, or go by your results. If you're not growing, it doesn't matter what your IGF number is.
That's my favorite thing. That's my favorite thing that Chase talks about. He's like, yeah, my blood markers were here on this specific generic.
But you're 130 pounds. Why does it matter?
Yeah, he did a run recently of a specific generic, and his blood work was incredibly high. It was incredibly elevated.
I saw his shape. He changed, not for the positive.
Yeah, he lost like 8 pounds or 10 pounds, and he's like, I was talking with him. He's like, I don't even feel like I'm running anything. And then, sure enough, he started Serum like a few days back.
Again,
and he's full and he's smiling.
The only difference, I don't want to go on a full-on Serum tangent, but like,
and
you've used Serum before.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, so that's what I'm currently using.
The only difference that I can figure out, and I know I've worked with the companies who make the other things as well, so I'm aware of all the ingredients, even if they don't list them all. The only difference I can figure is it's the other ingredients, the binders and the fillers. It's possible that somehow they're rendering some of it useless, or they're holding it basically in a depot for too long or something, because
those are just stabilizers, right?
Yeah, but there's something about Serum. Anyone who's used real Serum will attest to that. There's something about Serum. I don't know what it is.
I don't know. People ask me, they don't want to believe me, and I don't I don't think generics are terrible, especially
No,
the
no,
brand
I'm
we're
not anti.
talking about.
I'm not anti with certain ones. I think, we don't need to name brands, but
No,
there are
no.
certain bigger ones that are tested and things like that are quality things
Yeah.
by all means. And there's lots of pros that use that because
They're just still not Serostim.
it's just, and I hate to do that because now we're raising the price of it again by saying that, but
I know.
there's something about it. I don't know. And it's not to say that Sizen or because Sizen's made by the same company. It's not to say
True.
those other ones aren't the same. I have no experience with them. So in the United States, we don't tend to get those.
How different is, and we don't have to go down this, but how different is Sizen than
It's
Serostim?
stronger.
It should be, right?
So it's 8 milligrams per
Yeah.
versus 6 milligrams. It's technically stronger, but it's in a pen. So I don't know. I've not used it. I know guys in Canada who get it because I think it's more common up there. They also get, which is weird, they get the 4 and the 5 milligram Serastims, which we only get the 6s.
I have seen that.
Have you seen in the US the 4 and
Not
the 5?
in the US. I only see 6 in the
Funny,
US.
right? Because they claim that it's on the market. No pharmacist stocks it here. They only get 6s because that's what's usually, unless you're under 120 pounds, that's what you get.
True. Yeah.
I just thought it was fascinating because someone was talking about the units, and I was like, whoa, that's off. And I was like, oh, you guys get the weird milligram ones.
Yeah. I'm taking a bottle a day, but it's only 12. It's like, oh, well, you're missing out. Yeah, exactly.
Units short. No, so none of these markers are like irrelevant. I don't think that's right. I just think that the context isn't always there for these things. I wouldn't just judge, and I wouldn't purposely run things to get markers at a certain point either, because like we said, I'm going to keep shouting about the estrogen thing until someone finally listens. It might take years, but there is a reason. I said this before. I'm going to keep repeating it. There is a reason why men are more muscular than women, and women also produce less IGF. So what would be the difference between men and women? It's called estrogen. Estrogen is not an anabolic hormone on a traditional sense. It's not what causes the fetus to grow. It's not what's causing your baby to grow. That's actually progesterone.
Yeah.
Technically nandrolone to some degree. So it's not, it's not what people think it is. It helps with glycogen storage and some other things and some bone. It's not.
And that's why you feel fuller when you let it run sky high.
Yeah, and you're flat and you're stringy. If you have a crush or estrogen, your muscles are totally flat.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, that doesn't have anything to do with tissue growth.
No,
right. That's
just glycogen storage.
So again, I'm not anti-estrogen. Just leave it where it should be. You don't need to run it at 100 if you're a man.
I agree.
What was the next one?
So this one was kind of a general question about just the synergy between testosterone and some type of DHT, whether it's Masteron or Primo. How strong of a serum effect did Masteron have? It was all kind of generic questions. I just thought I would throw them in.
So I made some comments earlier this year about Masteron acting as a serum through. I think I was off on some of that. It seems to actually act more as an AI through its metabolite. In theory, no one really knows. Again, the problem with Masteron is it's not studied in men. Never has been. Never will be. There was a recent study done on its metabolites, and that's where I'm getting the AI thing from. And I was looking at some complicated estrogen receptor stuff, trying to figure out how Masteron will align with that. And I can't really find anything concrete. So I retracted my statement because I don't have any proof, and I don't want to say it if I can't prove it. So no one really knows. I think the other thing is I don't ever see guys on Masteron with like suppressed estradiol levels. You do see it act more like a serum, right? Because they don't really have the estrogen side effects. But what's occurring, no one really knows. I don't know. Is it blocking gene transcription at the estrogen receptor? Is it stopping estrogen from binding there? No one knows because it's not been looked at. It was only studied in women and rats for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And so we don't know, and we never will. There is no monetary reason why a pharmaceutical company will ever look at it again. So unfortunately, we will never know. And unless it pops up as some possible cure for some other new disease, no one is ever going to spend a dime on it. Unless someone wants to fund, if someone wants to start a GoFundMe, I will gladly set up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And like I feel like the same with Primo. The problem with a lot of these anecdotal things that you and I see in bodybuilders are like, do you even know if it's real? Like, I know if I'm not going to say things I shouldn't say. if I don't know where it's coming from, how do I know what it is? So it's like you see someone's blood work and they're like, well, Primo crushed my estradiol. Was it Primo or was it EQ? I don't know. Right? Like it could be, was it Primo or was it mix of, like, the common fakes for Primo are 3/4 Masteron and 1/4 test propionate. When Primo hurts, it's either Bayer hurts because it has no BA, because BA is toxic in infants. So there's no BA. That's how they can use it, because otherwise you'll kill a baby if you give BA.
No way.
Like the Bayer ampules, because they were designed to be used in neonates,
Yep.
have to not have BA in them. So they sting. That being said, underground lab Primo should not hurt. Primabon is not a painful molecule. It doesn't have some gigantic molecular weight. No. It's not something that's going to hurt, so it should be smooth.
But test probe will.
It's junk. It's got garbage in it. It's not filtered correctly.
Yeah.
If something's wrong with it, it's not, or it's not real. A lot of times it's 3/4 Masteron propionate and 1/4 test propionate.
And that will hurt.
Propionate's not filtered correctly. Test propionate technically shouldn't hurt either. That's a filtering issue. It's not like the propionate ester hurts because anyone's used mass propionate. It doesn't hurt.
No.
So
no.
It's what it happens is the concentration of testosterone is much higher in test propionate. And if it's not filtered through the proper Bell filter, you'll get sediment in there, and you're injecting sediment in with test propionate. That
little
hurts.
crystals.
Yeah. So that's all that is. It's not the test propionate hurts, because you can use Sustanon or any of those that have propionated. If it's made correctly, it doesn't hurt.
Okay.
That's a sign of incorrectly made gear.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or gear like the pharmaceutical company made it on purpose a certain way.
Yeah, and his question about synergy, I mean, all compounds are going to have some synergy together, specifically between a testosterone and a DHT. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the DHT is likely going to free test a little stronger than not having the DHT.
Correct.
Okay. So that would be my main synergy point between the two.
But still on a milligram basis, because it's kind of an interesting thing. On a milligram basis, they're still replaceable for each other. So most steroids are equal on a milligram basis as far as substituting. That doesn't mean muscle growth, right? Because this gets a really complicated conversation. We could do an entire 3-hour video on this. When people say all steroids grow muscle at the same rate, that's not true. They took a really bad study from 1953 where they were looking at nitrogen retention. And they're taking that little bit of data and they try to apply it to muscle growth. They're not the same thing. And they all don't have the same level of nitrogen retention. Even within testosterone esters, there's different nitrogen retention. Propionate holds less nitrogen than cypionate does.
Interesting.
That's not just an ester thing. It's just the kinetics are different on those drugs.
You think it would be opposite?
It's very weird. I can send you the stuff. There's actual studies on that stuff too. That being said, my point with the milligram thing is equipoise, nandrolone, Primo, Masteron. We're going to say Masteron, even though again it's not really been studied, but it seems to be roughly the same, perhaps slightly weaker. They're generally replaceable on a milligram basis. If you want 1,000 milligrams and you have 500 test and 500 EQ, I can easily take the 500 EQ out and put 500 Primo in, and it's going to be roughly the same cycle, right? Yeah, I mean the effects are different from different drugs, right? One might be wetter, drier, harder strength, neurological. Those are side effects. Those are non-genomic things. From a muscle point, roughly the same. Trembolone, clearly not the same on a milligram basis. It's at least 3 times as strong. Trestolone, clearly not the same on a milligram basis. No one's running grams of Trestolone.
I hope not. I don't know how they are.
Michelin Man, or very rich,
or breastfeeding.
Because it's like a big progesterone mess. But most are where the real synergy occurs, which is really cool, is anadrol and dianabol have an incredible synergistic effect with things that directly impact the androgen receptor. So trembolone is the primary one. So trembolone is like one of the strongest binders to the AR, and anadrol has no known affinity to the AR. But when you combine them, the sum of them, so I'm just going to make up a dose. This is not a recommendation.
Okay.
50 milligrams of anadrol and 50 milligrams of tren acetate together are like 1 + 1 = 3 versus them separate. You know what I mean? But if you took that same amount, if you added 50 milligrams of tren acetate and 50 grams of Masteron propionate, you're just additing. It's just an additive thing, not a multiplied effect.
But anadrol and tren.
Anadrol and D-bol do the same thing. Now, the reason why D-bol is not as common, right? D-bol tends to have more side effects with estrogen and bloating and blood pressure. And so most guys are not going to run 150 D-bol unless you're out of your mind, right?
Yeah.
But you can run more. Like, this is why a lot of the pros, whether they don't admit this, but like most of the bigger pros that I see are running Anadrol at some level, probably too much of it. And they're using it synergistically with tren in the off season because they just, whether they understand the science or not, they realize they grow more when they do that.
And we can make more videos on this, but just quickly off the top of your head, what other compounds are doing this together that you've seen that are that synergistic that it's worth mentioning?
It's generally Anadrol and D-bol combined with something else that's AR specific, but it could be anything. It could be Anadrol and Anavar have a synergistic effect. Like if you combine those two, now again, I would probably run some level of testosterone in there too. I wouldn't run those two orals, nor am I recommending two 17 alpha alkylated compounds together, but there is synergy. Any of those, so it's specifically because those two don't interact with the AR that they're working, and it's not non-genomic. We don't really know what they're doing. The pharmacokinetics of Anadrol are not fully understood. And again, it's one of those things that even though it's still FDA approved, no one's studying it anymore in that respect.
So basically, this isn't a recommendation, but take Anadrol with everything.
In theory. Now, I will say with the dosing of that, though, this is a kind of like where I do see it gets sketchy. So Anadrol does have a tendency for severe liver side effects, right? It's not a liver-friendly drug.
No.
That being said, the other thing people need to keep in mind is it's most steroids have a dose response curve, right? The more you take, the more you get. Testosterone, Trenbolone, Nandrolone, all these drugs. Now, if you could tolerate them, the more you take within reason, the more you get. It's not linear, but right, we know for a fact that more, like at least to a gram of testosterone, it's noticeably different.
Mm-hmm.
It probably flattens a little bit to 2 grams, but there's still an increase in benefits, assuming you can tolerate it.
Sure.
Anadrol at 150 fully flattens out. There's nothing. So like
that's interesting.
50 is good. 100 is better. 150 is just
the max.
It's just dumb. It's like now you're just hurting yourself. So when the guys are running 300, I'm not sure what they're getting. Now, it's not
you know what they're getting. They're getting they're getting a fatty liver and whatever else.
And it's like, now granted, they haven't studied this in 300-pound bodybuilders, so it's perhaps because they're bigger, maybe they could use more. I think it just honestly, I think it's just an excessive dose at that point.
Yeah.
Like every study, because that is one of those drugs that was studied excessively with AIDS to see what would help the most.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time at 150, it flattened. And it was just liver toxic stuff at 150.
It's like that pendulum we talked about.
Yeah. It was like, and the sad thing is if you read these studies, because it was the time before ethics were really in place, the control group died. Like the most horrible studies, because it was like people with HIV and like the control group had HIV and they got no drugs, they got a placebo, a full-on sugar placebo, and they died. And then the 50 milligram group lived, and the 100 milligram got even more muscular. And then the 150 lived as well. They just got side effects. Yeah. Nowadays, at least in studies like that, they give them at least a drug they know is effective. It's just not the studied drug, so they're not harming people. They didn't care. They were literally giving them nothing, and then they were dying.
That is wild.
It sucks to be in the control group back then.
Apparently. Let's see.
What else we got?
Injection frequency. I'll let you start with this. We differ on this a little bit, but we always come together in the end here. But I'll let you start with your thoughts on it.
I was just going to say, for me, I'll keep it really simple. I think testosterone is really the one. Testosterone is really the one that matters, right? Because you're trying to control estrogen conversion and DHT conversion, right? And so like the bigger the bolus dose and the less frequently, you get bigger spikes and bigger conversion, right? Your body doesn't know what to do with. It can deal with 100 milligrams every day much easier than it can 300 every 3 days. When it comes to DHTs or, things that are not converting, right? Like Mastron's not turning into DHT and it's not converting to estrogen. So like in theory, outside of the halfway, you're using propionate, you clearly have to inject frequently because you're going to get these weird dips. If you're using mastananthate, you could technically follow the ester guide and just do once or twice a week if you wanted to. Okay. I'm not a once a week guy. I think it's a little silly because you're still getting some weird dips, but like there's a reason why these things were invented, and they've been on those drugs for 70 years. Most of them true. Like nandrolone can clearly be injected once a week. It doesn't mean that's ideal, but you can do it. Yeah. And that's a 14-day half-life. Same with EQ. Now, would I inject 900 milligrams of EQ in one shot once a week? No, I'd probably spread it out.
Just for
Like
practical
logically,
reasons.
why though? I don't know. There's no real reason.
Yeah.
I think testosterone's one that matters, and I think it's based on the person. Like if you're someone who's a heavy aromatizer or a heavy DHT converter or whatever, then you know what? Then inject more frequently. Inject daily if you like it.
So we don't differ at all then.
No, I mean I respond better. I respond better to a slightly bigger bolus.
Okay.
I feel better when I get a slightly higher level versus like lower and steady.
So the last thing you added was going to be my only point where I thought we were a little different, but it turns out we're not, and this is how things work, right? I was going to say, if you know for fact that you're prone to estrogen-related side effects, whether that's acne, water retention, whether it's mood, whether it's sexual dysfunction, you're going to need to inject more frequently. And it's going to work. It's going to work better, in my opinion, in my experience. Yeah, and use that to your advantage, because if you're a guy that's leaner, like yourself, you stay very lean all the time. Use that to your advantage and do the opposite.
Yeah, I prefer twice a week, so I do twice a week if I want to.
Yeah, and I bet it works really well for you because you get that little hit in estrogen that, you
feel good.
You feel good. Yeah. So
and then there's a dose dependent thing too, right? So like, no, that's with TRT or some mild, beginner stuff. If you're at the point where you're using grams of things, you're injecting daily anyway.
You don't have a choice.
Like Roman is not injecting 3 times a week because he can even fit that in some place.
Yeah.
So that's the caveat too, is like, if you're an advanced, but I don't think advanced lifters are asking us on dosing frequency of things. They know how to do it. It's for the beginner who's injecting, 500 milligrams or less.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it feels good.
No, that's exactly right. And you can always go to every day, and then drop to 5 days a week.
Yeah, it's not going to drop out of your body.
No, and maybe
suspension, even propionate, it'll still be in you for 2 or 3 days. You're fine.
I'm telling you, there's some days where I just don't feel like it.
Yeah, so you miss it.
So I'm like, whatever.
You got no place to put, like, sore and you got bruises. You're like, where am I fitting it right now?
Yeah, I just don't feel like doing it. You got from the gym home late, and it's like, whatever. It'll be there tomorrow.
The one thing that people should understand, though, is not just the ester alone doesn't just affect the half-life. The parent compound affects it as well. So certain things, just to give an example, because sometimes the ester is not the only thing you need to look at when you're looking to figure out dosing frequency, like acetate, for instance. Trembolone acetate, right, is probably a 1.5 or 2 day half-life, give or take. Trestolone acetate is much shorter than that.
And that's from the molecular weight of the compound.
Yeah, the trestolone is just it's a different drug, so it's metabolized really quickly. Mm-hmm. And if anyone who's ever used it, you can feel it. It makes you sweat, almost immediately. It almost feels like thyroid stuff.
No kidding.
It's weird. It's a very strange thing, but it's got a very short half-life.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep going over dosing stuff again. I keep going there. It's like it should be used much more frequently. It should be used very frequently.
And what is your experience like with that? I've never used it. I have no intention to. I will have tits if I use it.
You feel it like immediately, like almost like an oral. You feel it immediately. Like sweaty, hypo, like maybe go hypo.
Really?
It does something really crazy with your metabolism, at least at first.
Mm-hmm.
At least with mine.
Mm-hmm.
You feel generally good. I think it's a valid comparison that people compare it a mix between Tren and Deca. Mm-hmm. I think you kind of get the feel, whichever one makes you feel good, we'll say it takes the feel good out of that, because I know you and I, our bodies are different with what feels good.
Yes.
You get that feel good from it where you're at peace with the world.
Yeah.
You're strong, but you're not amped to lift. So it's not like Halo or Anadrol or Tren that you're like, you want to get under that weight. It's more like you're strong because you're big. You're like, I'm a big, jolly guy, and I feel really strong right now.
Okay.
But you're not like motivated to lift stuff. You're like, you just happen to be like, wow, I just pressed the 160s and they didn't feel like anything. That's like just because you're gigantic. Like it makes you grow fast if you eat. I had to eat a ton on it to not be hypo. Like it was the weirdest. Like again, it's part of it's my metabolism. It was the kind of thing where like I was already eating in an excess, and then I would find myself like it was like the summer and I was like cleaning my deck or something, and I would go hypo and I would go inside and eat 3 bowls of cereal, and then I'd go back outside and like do more work, and then I had to come inside and eat more carbs.
Do you think there's an uncoupling effect, like Trenbolone might have.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It's just such a strange drug.
Mm,
The dose is so small, but yeah,
yeah.
you gotta like you should. It's supposed to be used daily. And what I don't remember the milligrams. It's a very weird milligram amount.
It's really small.
Yeah, I mean, you do hold definitely water from it. How much actual? I mean, similar to like a lot of these things that are wetter. Like there's definitely tissue that's coming from it.
Sure.
There's a lot of fluid. It's not necessarily, at least for me. Maybe if you ran, I don't know, if you controlled the water better somehow, maybe.
Do you feel, this is the last question I'll ask kind of about this, but do you feel fluid and mineral retention has the ability to stretch the fascia, and actually help build tissue that way? What are your thoughts? Okay. That's what I figured you would say.
So again, because I think we're thinking of it in the old school way. There used to be something called Milton's full bag theory. It was from like the 70s or 80s.
Yes.
That was when we pictured a chicken breast with that layer on it.
Yep.
The problem is if you actually look at human muscle, the fascia is like a spider web and it's actually inside the fibers. It's not a sac.
Over it.
Yeah. So like if you've ever done or seen surgery, it's not like there's a sac that's like stretchable. It's kind of it's like a structural part of the muscle internally, so you can't really stretch it.
And it's all just
in that respect, no.
Okay.
And the pump itself wouldn't contribute to growth either because it's technically lactate. We've injected lactate directly into the muscles of animals, and it doesn't cause any growth. So it doesn't mean in some way it's not contributing to something. So I'm not going to say it is an absolute because it could be one of those things in 5 years from now we learn something. Well, I don't want to be the guy who was like, no, I said, where science currently stands, it's not contributing to growth at all. There's leverage and stuff created from fluid and minerals, right? You're stronger,
sure.
Your joints feel better.
Yeah.
Aldosterone is good. Like that's one of the reasons why nandrolone is good. It increases aldosterone.
Everything's cushioned.
Yeah. So it's not to say that like we'll go with like something like Dante Trudel, like obviously the stronger you are, the bigger you can get to some degree, right?
Sure.
There's obviously a point where that's not the case, but
you get stronger within bodybuilding ranges.
Not A to B.
Yeah.
So to sum that up, the mechanical tension is what causes muscle growth. As far as we are concerned, it's not damage. We know that for a fact. It's not. There's no micro tears occurring. It's not stuff like that. Damage to a muscle. If you overtrain, you cause damage. You're not going to get bigger. Your body now has to divert protein synthesis to repair. You don't want that.
Yeah, because there's levels, right? You dig the hole. You got to fill that hole first.
Yeah, you don't want to be too big.
And then you got to build on top of that. Yeah. And that all takes a certain amount of calorie load, right? Yeah.
So it's basically what's occurring, like we talked about IGF before, just so people, this would be the longest video ever. You have IGF that's circulating both inside your muscles and outside as IGF. And when there's mechanical tension sensed, it splices the IGF into another form of IGF called mechano growth factor. And there are actual mechano sensors on your muscles that when they sense tension, they take in that mechano growth factor, and that's what spurs growth. That's that pathway of growth. That's the main driver of growth.
Yep.
There are other levers, obviously, that you can pull to cause growth, like the androgen receptor, but mechano growth factor is the primary one, and that's why when lifting, it's the mechanical tension that's causing the growth. It's not the pump. It's not the other things that are occurring. No. You just need tension, and it's either experience or it's not. It's not a thermostat. It's not like gradual degrees of it. It's on or not. It's a switch, which is
it's binary.
Kind of a mind-blowing thing to think about. It's not like you kind of slowly get there. It's either on or off. And if you do like what they call tempo lifting, and again, being enhanced kind of changes the scenario because you're forcing mechano growth factor in the muscles regardless. So you're kind of cheating biology. But as a natural lifter, if you did tempo lifting and you lifted 3 sets of 50-pound dumbbells, all 3 sets you curled 50-pound dumbbells, even if mechanical tension is adequate for the first set, it is no longer adequate for the next 2. So you're wasting your time. That's why progressive overload matters, because once it's been experienced, it won't be experienced at the same rate again. So you've
already adapted.
Either after another rep or another, there has to be some sort of progression in order to keep experiencing that. And that's why it's important for us to keep pushing the metrics up. But steroids obviously change that game.
Or even the angles and directions.
Whatever. Yeah, because you're changing where tension is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's localized growth. I mean, we know that your hamstrings will grow different from an RDL than they would from a lying leg curl.
Sure.
The hamstrings will grow more, at the proximal side, with one versus the other.
Yeah.
Distal on the other. But it's but that's kind of where I don't even know where I was going with that. We started with
No, you're good. You're good. This one came in just now. We probably don't have time to touch on
do
this,
it,
but
whatever.
okay. He's asking about the transition from cutting / fat loss contest phase to a rebound bulk phase. What we would change for cycle and diet. He just said he hasn't really seen anything about it specifically. So from what it sounds like is he wants to know the magic rebound. How does it work? How do you approach it? So let's say, you're finishing up your contest prep, you get on stage, next day comes about, right? How do you progress from there? Let's say the next 5 weeks. What's your approach?
I mean, it goes against what some of the guys are talking about now. I'm just going on pure science and my experience, which should have some value in those two things.
Sure.
There is no technical rebound thing in muscle growth that would occur. If anything, fat gain would be sped up because the body's very primed for survival at that point. You will obviously grow. You're very sensitive to insulin. You're coming out of a deficit. There's obviously growth, and if you're using anabolics, I think the biggest mistake is when guys do a show and they come off gear or they stop exercising. It'd be like not lifting during peak week. There's no group 4 if you don't lift.
Right.
I would say the smartest thing in my book is not to then bang some crazy cycle coming out of your show because your health is compromised. I would say,
and you don't need it.
Yeah, you don't,
because you're so sensitive to the food that the food is now the anabolic.
You just need something. So, like, if you come out of your show, rough. This isn't like you. I'm talking hypothetical with you, using you as an example. You come out of your show. Let's say we pulled test injectables the last week, so now you really have no test in your system. You might have some orals floating around. You eat one really great meal. You win your show, right? You're winning. Sure. You eat one really fantastic meal with your family, your friends, whatever you're going to do. You kind of go back to your diet, so you're not blowing your stomach out. And we reintroduce test for you at whatever a level that's needed for you, right? So that's probably not TRT. It's probably slightly higher. And
we'll just call it TRT plus, like the other guys.
So we introduce some sort of mild anabolic that's not going to stress your health out. There's no orals again, like unless you're doing multiple shows, that's a different scenario. This is not a multiple show scenario. This is you're done competing for a while. Get some level of anabolism back in there, and you slowly titrate the food up, and you take advantage of that window. And then perhaps after a month or so, then we kind of look and say, let's get some labs. Let's see your health. Do we do a health phase? We do reduce stuff, or do we then continue to push? And then that depends on you. How you feel, your biomarkers, like your digestion, your feeling, what's your body doing? You sleeping? Is your mood okay? Is your blood work really screwed? Or are you good? And that's kind of where I would go from there. That's why there's no definite answer. But I that's how I would approach something. I would just reintroduce the basics back in enough to support anabolism, but I wouldn't be I wouldn't go back on 5 grams of gear.
No, and we share this this parallel here. So basically what I do for guys is when the cutting phase is done, I go about, let's say 3-4 weeks back to their last higher amount of food. And I just start them back there. So maybe it's 6 weeks out, right? I go back to their 6-week out diet and I start them there. And then maybe they'll have, still a heavy skip load meal on the Sunday or Saturday or whatever. As far as drugs, you don't need much, right? Not when you're so sensitive to food. It's the one time where you need some, but the food is the driver, and man, you feel like you're on all sorts of stuff. But really, it's always the driver.
And the reason why you don't want to come off, so people understand, is what would occur is your cortisol is going to be really high at that point, and you're no longer on things like halotestin or trembolone that are going to block that effect. So now all of a sudden, testosterone's really low, and your cortisol is really, your body composition is going to go to shit. Your brain, you're just going to be stressed out. You're not going to
sleep is probably shit.
So it's like you wouldn't do that. And honestly, like anyone who's ever competed before, if you've pulled some of that stuff at the end, you just really want test again. Like you kind of just feel like you're kind of excited just to have like a normal level of hormone back in you again. Just feel good and eat some food.
I want to feel human again.
And that's really it. I don't think it's anything crazy. I think when guys are like banging huge cycles coming out, I don't know.
I don't think you need it.
I don't think you need it. And I would be nervous with someone's health to do that.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. We're very similar there. Let's see. We have the last and final one.
Wow.
And this one is from my wife, Amanda. She wants to know your guess on the gender of our baby.
My gut feeling is a girl.
Okay. Yeah,
I don't know why.
we're on the same page.
I don't know why. Did we ever talk about that?
We haven't. I've seen, Justin touch on it a little bit about bodybuilders having girls.
Oh, see, I wasn't even thinking that.
So you were just thinking it as feeling.
I was, and I don't honestly know the logical reason, but it
That's
just
fine.
comes to me and feels natural. And I could be 50%
Of
wrong on
course.
that one.
Yeah.
But it's just like it just seemed like the right answer.
Yeah.
And that was with like no thought.
Okay.
I mean, I think you'd be an amazing father either way.
Appreciate
Obviously.
that.
I don't think that there's a difference in the way you parent either. I have one of each, and they're very different, which is kind of cool to see difference.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my gut.
Okay.
See if I'm right or not.
Yeah.
How long do you have?
We'll let's see. So her due date is July 31st.
Wow. Okay.
So about 4 or 5 weeks after the show.
How is she getting sick, or was she getting sick?
Dude, she was very sick the first 2 trimesters.
It could be very wrong. She could be boy.
Right.
Boy.
Yeah.
And some of that's wives' tales, but
yeah, a lot of it is.
My
right.
wife was much sicker with my son.
Really? Okay.
The hormones, like your body's trying to protect you, but the hormones are very different.
Yeah. But no, she's doing a lot better now.
I think generally that's what you see. The beginning is really rough, and then it kind of.
Dude, she didn't know what she was getting for. She's like, "Holy heck!" No one told me about this part. Yeah. So, yeah, we're excited though. It'll be fun. She's going to be a really good mom, and I'm just going to try to help out where I can. Just going to do the best I can, man. That's.
I'll tell you, I honestly in the beginning is more on like it's a lot tougher on them.
Yeah,
you kind of get a break for the first couple months because it's really just them sleeping and eating, and if she's feeding baby, there's not a whole lot you could do anyway. Right. It's really it's like one continuation. It's just a continuation of the toughness for them for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll go punch later.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was the last one.
Cool, brother. Always a pleasure, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we should put more questions up next week for
cool. I'm down.
You can do this as a running thing if you want.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We'll continue it on. I'm gonna start doing chases with him on Sunday.
Nice. Okay. Send me your link tree and everything, and I'll link all your stuff down below. Right.
Okay.
Like I said before in the beginning of the video, Tommy's obviously a coach. You can tell by his screen name. I'll put your Instagram and all that stuff in your coaching.
Appreciate it. Yeah, the website will go live in probably about a month now.
Okay.
My brother owns a marketing business, so
cool.
He's doing my website. He bartered some coaching for me, so he's down 35 pounds. I'm extremely excited for him. It was funny, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with because it's humorous to me. He sent me a video of him in the mirror, and he's playing with his sternum, and he's like, "Bro, do you know what this is?" He's like, "I've never felt this before," and I'm like, "Dude, it's your sternum." I'm like, "You were a fat ass. That's why you didn't feel it before."
Wow.
But I was so happy that he sent me that. I'm like, it's the small victories that once you get deeper into bodybuilding and stuff, you're like, "Oh man, my glutes aren't shredded enough." And my brother finds
legs aren't separated.
Yeah, my brother finds his sternum for the first time, like a baby finding their ass crack. And
we are pretty sick though, right? Like I wear a sweatshirt at the gym. Like my body fat's pretty low all the time. Like I don't even want to look in the mirror. Like I'm bothered by the way I look.
I wear sweatshirts at work during the summer because I don't want people to see
the
veins in my arms. I don't want them to know I'm a meathead. But yeah, that's what I'll leave you with. But yeah, let's
cool, brother.
We'll hook up later and we'll get some questions rolling out for next week. So
well, thank you again.
Cool. Thanks again, Kurt. Appreciate you.